Hello, and welcome to this episode of Security Journal UK Leaders in Security podcast series. I'm your host, Millie Marshall-Loughran, the Deputy Editor of Security Journal UK. In today's episode, I'm joined with Andy Mason, Craig Kyson, and Clare Causier from Redline Assured Security. We'll be diving into the latest threats across aviation, maritime, transport and venue security, and how integrated training, tech and quality assurance are vital for resilience. Let's get into it.
Andy, would you be able to tell us a little bit about Redline Assured Security? For example, what the company does and its development?
Yeah, thanks, Millie. So Redline was established as Redline Aviation Security Limited in 2006, with a primary focus on delivering high-quality security training across the aviation industry. Through the training that was undertaken from 2006, Redline identified the opportunity to be able to expand their portfolio to include quality assurance and covert testing, which they introduced in 2009, before then further expanding their portfolio with the introduction of a threat image recognition training system in 2011. Redline continued to expand in the sectors that it was supporting with the assurance of the 2012 Olympics, particularly during its construction phase, as well as the quality assurance of other critical national infrastructure across the UK. Redline were endorsed by the International Civil Aviation Organisation in 2012 and is the only UK aviation security training centre to attain the ICAO status, and as well as that they also attain an outstanding for their training framework with the UK CAA. Acknowledging the expansion of the capability just beyond the aviation sector, Redline had to look at their branding because their branding was solely focused on aviation. So in 2015, they rebranded to Redline Assured Security to make sure that we covered that sector expansion. Whilst in the meantime, we were also broadening our horizons globally with various projects ongoing in the likes of Bangladesh and Nigeria, to name but a few. What that rebranding allowed us to do was offer further support across critical national infrastructure, whilst also branching into financial institutes, rail, maritime, as well as arenas and stadia. And finally, in terms of Redline's product range, it's very expansive. It covers various training offerings, as I mentioned, quality assurance and covert testing, which across various sectors can be named as red teaming, black teaming, or even mystery shopping. And as well as that, we offer auditing in the form of security audits, regulatory audits, and also offer various technological solutions through learning management systems, security management systems, and general compliance and regulatory support beyond that.
Thank you so much, Andy, for that comprehensive overview of Redline. Can each of you introduce yourselves and your role within Redline? Would we be able to start with you, Clare?
Sure, hi Millie. So I'm Clare Causier. I'm Head of Training for Redline and I've worked for Redline for the past 14 years. I'm responsible for Redline's instructor-led and e-learning training, the quality of the training, the design, the development and the delivery of it to ensure that it still continues to set the benchmark within the industry and meet all the requirements under the appropriate regulations for which that training may sit. As Andy mentioned, we're an ICAO ASTC, Aviation Security Training Centre, where we're endorsed. Redline was endorsed back in 2012. And part of my role here is I'm actually the ASTC director. So part of that function means that I'm responsible for ensuring that here at ASTC Doncaster that we proactively and fully support ICAO to achieve their strategic goals, supporting further development and promotion of aviation security through the high quality training. And likewise, along with my colleagues Andy and Craig, we're responsible into the managing director and accountable for our own budgets and future businesses for each of our own departments.
Thank you, Clare, for introducing yourself. Andy, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your role at Redline?
Well, I'm Head of Covert Testing and Quality Assurance. So I'm directly responsible for the delivery of services to all departmental clients. And I have to ensure the delivery of over 20,000 tests across aviation, including cargo, in-flight supplies, airport supplies, critical national infrastructure and critical assets, rail, events and arenas, as well as maritime itself. The effective delivery of that includes meeting client-specific KPIs, testing across all of the operational hours, which includes weekends, bank holidays, pretty much any time throughout the evenings and nights as well as providing my clients with beneficial feedback which supports their identification of the cause of outcomes, areas for improvements and recommendations to ensure that the quality assurance testing process effectively supports the quality assurance cycle that they have to integrate internally.
Thank you so much, Andy. And finally, Craig, could you introduce yourself and your role at Redline?
Sure. So, hi, I'm Craig Kyson. I'm the head of technology for Redline. I've been with Redline now for 8 years and have around about 25 years experience developing software products. So as you may have gathered from Andy's introduction to Redline, there's a lot of expertise in terms of training and quality assurance. And my role was really to use technology to support Redline in achieving those objectives of providing world-class training and quality assurance solutions. So I'm now responsible for the development, support, and operation of a portfolio of online services, which we use now to deliver to around about 70,000 people on a global basis in 50 plus countries. That includes our security management system, our learning management systems, and we also have a specialized training tool, threat image recognition training that we refer to as TER, that is basically used to train X-ray screeners to be able to identify prohibited items.
Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. It's great for our listeners to get to know a bit more about you and Redline Assured Security and the impressive work you're doing across so many different sectors. So Andy, to start us off, could you give us an overview of some of the major threats currently facing areas like aviation, maritime, critical infrastructure, transport, and venue security?
Yeah, no problem at all. I think it's quite difficult to go into them individually because we could sit here most of the day talking about the individual threats to each one. I think the key is to understand that they all have very similar threats and threat profiles that we have to look at. And I think the key thing to look at is where we currently find ourselves at the moment, because we are in a big stage of global unrest. The conflict levels that we've got are probably the highest we've seen since World War II. Certainly the highest that I've seen them within my lifetime, for sure. There's key conflicts going on internationally, so in the Middle East, in Ukraine, each of which in itself brings unrest at an international level, whilst also at national and local levels within numerous countries. Aviation predominantly, certainly if you look at the news and everything like that, certainly over the last 20 to 30 years has always been a very prestigious target for any individuals that have intent to either be malicious or cause disruption. But as I say, that rhetoric's kind of moved. It's no longer just aviation. It is all-encompassing. It's anywhere where it's going to get a news article. It's whatever is going to have the largest impact, whether that be financially, legally, from a reputational perspective, or just in terms of getting in the headlines and being able to get those headlines for their cause.
Could you give me some examples of the threats facing sectors as a whole?
Most recent threats that we have probably seen have included Palestine action. So they caused multi-millions of pounds worth of damage to military aircraft. We've seen individuals deliberately evading airport and port security control measures to either board aircraft or an attempt to board various different liners from a port's perspective. We've seen the continued development of explosive and incendiary devices through recent massage pillows that we've seen going through cargo, to the emergence of the use of radios and pagers in suicide attempts in the Middle East. And just because they're happening everywhere else doesn't make us immune to it. And by us, I mean all of these different entities in all of the different sectors that we're working in. As I've mentioned, these exact same synergies are the same across every sector. So we can see them across maritime, critical infrastructure, transport, hospitality. As we've already seen through numerous protest groups that have caused significant damage across museums and art galleries, causing disruption to transport networks, bringing them to a standstill, while individuals or groups have been targeting the hospitality industry, for example. We've seen attacks in the past against the rail industry, so in the form of sabotage, so whether that be just taking copper wiring, or through to the London bombings, the Parsons Green attacks, as well as attacks against arenas globally. So just this year, we've seen foiled plots here in the UK, as well as a major foiled plot against Lady Gaga's gig that was due to occur in Rio earlier this year.
How has the landscape changed throughout the years?
As we see technology advancing, the threat landscape has changed quite significantly, particularly over the last 3 to 5 years, where technology has become a lot more prominent. There's heavy use of drones, whether that be for smuggling or the carriage of explosive devices, and there's been numerous cyber attacks which have brought infrastructure to a standstill. We've seen impacts to the loss of critical infrastructures. We've seen what impacts just the loss of an electrical supply chain can do to major entities. So anyone with the appetite and willing to do so is going to be able to cause acts, particularly where some of these acts have been accidental and just through mechanical fault. An individual with intent could cause significant damage. So the key to it is to maintain the pace, remain ahead of what the threat is. But the key is sectors have to be willing and have the appetite to do so themselves. They have to assess their risks and vulnerability through effective quality cycles on a frequent basis so they can continue to mitigate that threat. Because if they do it once, that's only applicable for the time that they do it. It doesn't protect them for the future. So the key is they need to continue with that cycle.
Andy, that was a really eye-opening breakdown of the threat landscape across different sectors, from evolving technologies to the shift towards cyber risks and protest-led disruption. So thank you. Claire, picking up from that, how does the continuous security training cycle come into play to help mitigate those kinds of threats Andy have mentioned? Could you walk us through what it looks like in practice?
Yeah, so I think it's quite interesting what Andy was saying about the different threats that have been affecting the sectors. And I think when we look at that, the continuous security training cycle is really key to ensure that skill fades in those areas don't lead to an increased risk. So many of the tasks, I think we could all agree that within security can be quite repetitive, and some of these skills can be maintained on a day-to-day basis. But some of the more critical tasks, as Andy talked about, are technically complex. And where you've got the technology being more advanced and alongside threats not being routinely encountered, it's really important that you're going to consistently train your staff, but also consistently test your staff, quality assure your staff, to build that positive security culture within the team, but also to give you confidence that those undertaking those security activities are confident and competent in the duties, all which obviously will reduce the risk to the business or the area or the sector that you're in. And it's quite interesting actually when we look at that full 360 view of the constantly training and testing of staff. So Craig's team have a security management system, and within that they've built these add-ons that allow an area or a sector with the management team to be able to look at it. So I'll probably let Craig do a little bit more of explaining into that, but it just falls in really, really nicely from the threats that we're encountering and that continuous cycle.
Yeah, so thanks, Claire. So just to pick up on the key point that Claire's making there, that once somebody is trained and once you've established your security system, then to really make sure that it's adaptable and that it maintains its effectiveness, then it should really be subjected to ongoing quality assurance. If you don't do that, then what you'll see is as Claire pointed out, you'll see skills fade, you'll see poor culture emerging, and ultimately what you'll do is you'll see risks increasing, and that's the last thing that we want to see. So to Claire's point about technology, if we consider an X-ray screener, for example, then they're very clearly there to protect aviation from prohibited items, firearms, etc., finding their way onto aircraft. That's the last thing that we want to see. So if we consider the X-ray screener in that as part of that system as a potential single point of failure, then we need to kind of consider how we can go about quality assuring and making sure that that barrier is effective. So if you do take an X-ray screener, for example, they're subjected to a national X-ray competency test. So this is driven by regulation and sets the minimum standard that you would expect to see from an X-ray screener. But it's once a year, and because it's regulatory driven, it reflects the minimum standard that you would be required to achieve. So we can now layer on top of that some of the activities that Andy's team do on a regular basis in terms of quality assurance. So they're also subjected to covert testing, whereby the tester is potentially taking a prohibited item and making sure that the X-ray screener is able to identify and prevent that threat from going through. The X-ray devices themselves, they project images onto the X-ray to make sure that the screener there is paying attention.
And so, Craig, where does Redline come in?
And where we come in, we provide training tools that allow the screener to maintain their currency in terms of their competency, where they're interacting with X-ray images and making sure that they're able to demonstrate that they're able to identify threat items. And the key thing here in terms of the technology is that we can bring all of those data points together.
Could you describe what happens during a controlled environment?
So some of these things like the covert testing and performance assessments that they'll be subjected to, they happen within an operational environment, whereas some of the tests are obviously very controlled. So in a controlled environment, somebody might be able to demonstrate that they are actually able to identify a threat. But in an operational environment, they may be distracted, they may be tired, they may be poor morale. Okay, so if we bring in all that together, if we consider almost like quality assurance and training, they're almost two sides of the same coin. So you're effectively using the quality assurance to identify your requirements and areas that need corrective action, and then you're applying the quality of the training to make sure that everybody's got the capability that they need.
That was a really interesting perspective from you both on how continuous training and tech solutions can maintain readiness even in high pressure or rapidly changing environments. Andy, building on that, I'd love to dive a little deeper into your area. How do you go about ensuring the quality of security, and what are some of the key things security professionals should be watching out for day to day?
Yeah, so I'll come back to the continuous security training cycle shortly, because that does play a factor in it. But I think the key thing is, first we need to understand what are we trying to achieve. Because to ensure the quality of security, first you've got to understand what security do you need? What are you trying to mitigate? Why are we putting these measures in place? If we don't understand that, we don't have a benchmark through which to quality assure any security, because we don't know the measures. So how can we ever define and ensure the quality of that security? So coming back to the continuous security cycle, once you've understood that, once you've set what the security measures are, what you're trying to achieve with those security measures, there's then a lot of factors that come into it, all of which we can measure and all of which come into that quality of security. And the key for any individual or an entity is they have to consider them all. Because if you consider just one aspect of it, you're not getting a true reflection of the quality of that security. You might get a very narrow view of how that security was performing at that given time, at that given place, but it doesn't give you the full factor. It doesn't give you any human factors that may come into it. It doesn't give you, as Craig was mentioning, it doesn't give you how are they performing in a defined environment where they have no external pressures versus how do they perform in an operation where they're having to get hundreds, if not thousands of people through a queue as quickly and as safely as possible. So that's the key thing for me, is making sure that they bring all of those factors in. Because predominantly at the moment what you see is each one is looked at silos. You either have different teams responsible for different things. So you might have a training team, you might have a compliance team, you might have a quality assurance team. Each one of them is looking at the same thing, effectively. They're all looking at the quality of security, they're just looking at a different aspect of it. And really they should each be coming together frequently to collectively look at what it is, so that they can use that full data set to provide them a true picture. And by bringing all of them in together, it allows you to do an effective root cause analysis. So that allows you to effectively understand what your risks and vulnerabilities are, what your threats are. And it allows you to look at every different aspect that you look at. And it doesn't just focus on, okay, that person's missed it because they're not capable, or that person's missed it because the training's not effective or the equipment's not effective. It allows us to look at that bigger picture and understand it. Once you have that understanding, developing the quality of security just comes out as a byproduct. It will highlight what the potentials for improvement are, and then ultimately, again, comes back to that appetite, the intent for the individuals or for the entity to want to develop that security. Does it meet the requirements that they set from the start? And if it doesn't, what do they need to do to meet them requirements? And the key is, if they don't understand, is to go to either businesses that understand, or use the regulators or best practices within the various different sectors that they work in, to get the right knowledge, the right understanding, to make sure that they're using the right methods to be able to achieve an effective security product.
And I think the right knowledge there is key as well. You know, when we look at our team and they go out to instruct, we think about the training that's put in behind the team before they actually go out and train these skills to people. So if I take Redline and what we do here, we go through quite a rigorous program where we're kind of recruiting, induction of them, competency to instruct and continue professional development. So if we take some instructors, it could be at least 6 months before they're able to go out and impart that knowledge on them, because it would take that long for us to give them the information for them to do it. So it starts there back when Andy was saying there, starting at the beginning, you have to have the right individual teaching them the right way, first of all, to hopefully they can then continue that on.
No, great, definitely.
You've all given us such great insight into how training, tech and assurance weave together to build strong security frameworks. Claire, I'd love to explore how that actually plays out across different sectors. What are the key differences you see between regulated and unregulated environments? And are there any core principles that carry over no matter the sector?
Yeah, I suppose regardless whether you're in a regulated or unregulated space, there are core security principles. I think we've talked about various sectors here as well that are obviously constants and that are transferable from high end to incident response to risk management, down to, basic, you mentioned there, access control or awareness training. But, whether you're searching a bag because you're about to go on a 10-hour flight somewhere, or whether you're searching a bag because you're about to go and watch your favourite band at an arena, it's the same core principles that are there. So there's lots of things that are transferable. And we find now, as Andy alluded to at the start, we've moved out of that aviation space and we're very much within a non-regulated sites and environments now. Even in Craig's operating in there as well with these software solutions. But I don't know what you guys think, but probably the main challenges of an unregulated environment will be budget constraints, because they didn't need to think about security or factor into security when they're doing their budget controls. Thinking back to what Craig was talking about in terms of the consistently training and consistently testing them as well. So they're not thinking about the whole holistic approach of it. And then, of course, the whole culture from the top as well. They're maybe being resist to being held accountable, where in a regulated space there used to be potential financial penalties on them. So in a non-regulated space, they're maybe a little bit more resistant to move into that factor or that area. But I think it's quite key that a lot of them should go in there to set clear kind of frameworks and guidelines. Not suggesting everyone gets financial penalties, but there has to be some repercussion if things are not done correctly.
Yeah, and I think the challenge we've seen is kind of, as I mentioned earlier, the key is it all comes down to the appetite of the entity, regardless of, regulatory, they've not really got a choice, but where it's non-regulated, it does come down to that appetite. And sometimes across various sectors, it's more of a reactionary response to an event that's occurred, as opposed to a case of looking at it holistically, looking at it in advance, and looking at, going back to what we were talking about threat, the continuous changing of what that threat looks like. Ultimately, they've got to take into account those changes in threat. And they've got to look forward into that, so that they're not waiting for an incident to happen.
Yeah.
Because although it may appear as a cost and a hindrance right now, the cost and the impact to the business in mitigating the threat before it becomes a threat is much less than the measures that come in place once an event has occurred.
And that's really interesting as well. When we think about quite a lot of the work that we actually do, is that surge capability that we have here. So alongside the 29 instructors that we have with the quality assurance team, and obviously all the team that you've got, Craig, that can build all the background technology pieces, a lot of our work recently has come from those that have not thought about the risk and the threats to them, and then something happens, and then of course it's straight away, as Andy's then kind of alluded to, that you're then having to throw everything at it now, get this fire out for us, which actually is probably a little bit more costly for them in the long run if they had did what you said at the start, is to look at actually the whole holistic approach. What do I need to do just now? Where is my threat? Where are my risks and vulnerabilities, and what do I need to do to kind of reduce them?
Yeah, just picking up on that point, as somebody who joined Redline from a broader technology background, is when we were building our systems, the thing that was drilled into me is it's all about risk. Everything that we do is about risk. And I think when it comes to the threats that we're trying to prevent with our security measures, then you might have something like, I don't want something to happen at my building, I don't want to have something to happen at my event, I don't want something to happen at my airport. Whereas the regulation sets the minimum standards because we don't want that terrorist threat to happen anywhere. So by taking that risk-based approach, by definition, by complying with the regulation, you're putting in place some of the risk mitigation that you would want, but you still need to kind of go over and above that to identify the threats that you're going to have locally to make sure that the security measures are appropriate for you. And in terms of driving behaviour, some of the things that we see in our system where it is driven by regulation, if you produce a report that says this person will be non-compliant if they don't do this training, that training gets done. Whereas if it's not driven by regulation, then you're really relying, and you're going to have like a bit of a patchwork quilt of responses, depending on, even where there's good intentions. If there's, as Andy mentioned, even if there are good intentions, if there's not the budget, then that training will then be constrained.
Yeah, and kind of adding to that, in the non-regulated sector, there is a lot of security best practice information that is available to businesses to be able to look at. It's free on the web for them to be able to access through various government and security portals. And we would recommend that for anyone that's not in a regulated sector, is to make sure that they're at least measuring themselves against those security best practices. And as I say, look at what are their risks and vulnerabilities and continually review that as part of their business risk.
Craig, Claire and Andy, thank you all so much for joining me today. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I think our listeners will have taken away a lot about the vital role Redline plays in not just delivering security solutions, but driving continuous improvement across sectors. From covert testing to high-stakes training and adapting to evolving global threats, it's clear that a proactive, integrated approach is more important than ever. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Security Journal UK Leaders in Security podcast. I've been your host, Millie Marshall-Loughran. Make sure to keep an eye out for our next episode coming soon. Thank you.